Hello and welcome to This Is Going to Hurt. I am joined today with Yarmo and AJ. Welcome.
It's going to be fun. This will be good.
Episode 01, we covered some basic grammar, some of the definitions of the freedom and slavery dynamic. We stated some of our positions, being that the political spectrum is neither left nor right. The actual interpersonal dynamic on this planet is between freedom and slavery, and the way that you think about things going in between your ears and using that quantum computer of your brain. Now, using this is a lot easier with methods, which are some of the things we talked about last episode with the Trivium and Quadrivium comprising the classic liberal arts. This episode, we're going to continue following that theme, more or less, of the Trivium, where we had grammar. Now we are on to logic. Logic in the Trivium sense classically was Aristotelian logic, using some of the methods and propositions brought forth by Aristotle and entirely into a school of thinking that has greatly shaped the philosophical conversations that we've had throughout history. Now, let's talk about some of the foundational basics of logic before we get too far ahead of ourselves here. And we can keep it as simple as possible to make understanding of it, but still open the doorway for further encouragement to learn more about logic. The first two of which are the law of identification and the law of non-contradiction. Now, what might those things mean? Starting with the law of identification. Why did we do what we did last episode?
Lay the ground, because, it all starts with grammar. That's the first step. Then comes logic. It's a method, so you have to do it step by step. And now we are on the step 2. So we are going to cover logic here. AJ.
Well, I'd like actually just to roll back a little bit as to why grammar is important, right? So just a little bit, a small rollback. Why do words matter? Why is grammar such an important thing? Well, what are words? Why do we use them, right? So we use them to communicate, yes, but what are we communicating? Now, we could communicate our subjective experiences, okay, but what is that subjectivity based on? Like, if we don't have labels on objectivity, meaning if you don't put a label on something that you can observe within nature, you can't really relay information that you've experienced as such. So this is why I think words do matter. Depending on the language, some words are a bit more precise than others as well. So words are not necessarily perfect, right? They're the best thing we have, it seems, as sounds to relay, well, as I said, objective world, your surroundings, but also your subjectivity. But your subjectivity is based off what you're experiencing from the objective world. So that, for me, is why it's crucial that we get a good understanding of what words mean. Because if you're not able to agree on that thing that you're describing, or on that word that you're trying to use as a description, you can't get anywhere to describe what you're experiencing, right? So, yeah, that's for me. That's why words matter. And it's not easy to use I mean, if you have to go around as well trying to be as perfect as possible in which word you're using, that is also a bit of an effort. But people do need to make a little bit more of an effort to use the appropriate words. And I think some words are overly used. One typical one that comes to mind right now, because everything's so politicized, is Nazi. Right? They keep saying, oh, you're a Nazi this, or you're a white supremacist and more of that, but that's not really the case for most people. So that's when the words are overly used, they start losing their true meaning. So another word that comes to mind that I hear all the time is, oh, it's amazing. Oh, it's, I don't know, that's, well, other words that are, mean sort of amazing and all that. It's that they are, fantastic and all these things. Well, if you really look at the meaning, they probably shouldn't be used in the way they're being used to describe what you are feeling, right? But that's okay, I guess. Everybody's got their own vernacular, you could say. But yeah, so therefore, for me, this is why grammar is very important to get right from the start. But then also, when you're doing the grammar, as we mentioned in the last episode, is to when you're doing the grammar of a subject, of a topic, it has to answer the questions who, what, where, when, so as to get the foundations of what you're describing, get the foundations correct, so that we can then move on to what it is you're experiencing, right? And that's where we move into the logic aspect, because sometimes you could say there's too many fallacies, which we'll get into, I guess, in a moment. So moving into the logic aspect slowly, did you guys want to add anything about the grammar aspect, or shall we just jump into the logic?
I just had an analogy come to mind that grammar, logic, and rhetoric are a lot like building a house, where the grammar is the foundation that the rest of it stands on. And that's why the law of identification. You need to know what something is and what defines it from other things that are similar to it in the world. Because if you don't have an accurate description of something, then you can use these words like amazing, and you don't have an accurate definition of it. You have a loose definition of it. So you also have a loose set of circumstances and situations that you use that grammar in. So it is vital to know what you're talking about, at least how to define the terms that you are using, so that you know that you're using them correctly. And then what is knowing that you're using them correctly? Well, that's logic, and that's where the law of non-contradiction sets in. If this is an apple in my right hand and a glass of water in my left hand, then you can only define the apple as the apple. The apple cannot be both the apple and the glass of water at the same time, because it defines the laws of non-contradiction. So everything is what they are, and to make truth of it, you have to find how those pieces fit into their systems without having any way of contradicting itself. And if you find a contradiction, it's like a revenue to further explore to find what a non-contradictory definition is. That's like putting up your framing, putting in the plumbing, putting in the electrical. You don't want your electrical wires running through your water pipes, and you don't want your radon gases going straight into the kitchen. So once that all fits together and it functions, it works, you're logically piecing it together. And then you want to make it usable. You want to make it livable. You want to make it presentable. So you package it all in rhetoric. That's putting on your siding, putting on your nice roof, painting everything, cutting it really fine, doing all of the little details and being thorough with it to get the end result of why you learned that thing in the first place. Well, that's the rhetoric of it. So today we learned how it all fits together.
So the logic is, in a way, is a tool. What is it? Yeah, it's a tool to sort of debunk the errors in the grammar.
I was trying to put together this event in my hometown where I wanted to find out if there's any ground to find a new political movement. This was like 6-7 years ago. And the Finnish national broadcast company approached me for an interview, and I accepted. And the journalist painted it as this right-wing extremist Nazi event. And he used those words. And I told him that, wait a minute, let's define the word Nazi. Because I understood right away that he was trying to paint the event in a certain light. And I continued that. Actually, I said to him that I know what you're trying to do. But if you knew your history, you know that Nazi comes from the National Socialist movement, and it's a leftist movement. So are we on the same ground with this? And he was quiet, and in the end, he didn't put that segment of the interview to the final piece.
Hmm. Yeah, so just to comment on that, so obviously these tools are only as good as the honesty of the person you're having a conversation with as well. If they are not willing to be honest about trying to actually getting to the bottom of things, or the truth and all these sort of things, then it's very well. You can in a way. I mean, just another analogy has sort of come to mind right now, is when you're using logic against a world that is extremely politicized or propagandized, or we're in this post-truth era. The logic acts a bit like a mirror to Medusa, right? If you're familiar with the Greek mythology of the story of Medusa, well, one of the ways that Medusa got, Medusa is this sort of like serpent type of god who's got all the the funky hair with all the spider, all the snakes. And when she looks at you and you look into her eyes, you turn to stone. So one of the ways of the heroes, I can't remember, was it Heracles, or which is Hercules, or it might have been somebody else. But anyway, he used the reflection of his shield to return her own reflection against her, so that she, or this monster, then turned to stone. So in a way, logic is a bit of a reflection, a bit of a shield, I guess, against an intellectual shield, against anybody that's maybe being dishonest, or not necessarily dishonest, but they're not using words in their appropriate manner. So that you can see maybe that the conversations may be highly emotional and not very rational. So yeah, that's sort of one of the analogies that comes to mind. Yeah.
And also, when you talk with somebody and you use certain words, you have to find a common ground that both parties understand what we are talking about, that we are on the same page.
Yeah.
It can be a very emotionally charged subject when it gets into realms of what is in actual reality objectively discernibly true with the method, and what are things that we want to be true, or perhaps what are things that we were propagandized and emotionally took in with such fervor that it may as well be true within us. And now, to use a tool like logic in this example, you're going to come up to the fact eventually that what you were told and the intellectual goods that you purchased were bunk, and they don't have a lot of utility and value, and perhaps could have even been detrimental. Now, some people are so emotionally tied up in the way that they create their reality that it is a threat to their identity to use logic and to think critically. And for somebody who might be watching this episode, more than likely you put in enough internal work to want to learn to discern the truth, but it's likely you're going to encounter people in the world that they want nothing to do with actually being able to think clearly about things. And it's important to realize that that same impetus to protect your self-identity will manifest itself as resistance to you becoming conscious. And that's something you need to know going into it when you want to learn these things and practice these things, is you are inviting a level of disillusionment into your life by choosing to think about things and discern things only in a way that is verifiable by evidence. And evidence is the biggest part about logic, because if you don't have evidence for a claim, it cannot be considered valid to use in your rhetoric. So a lot of things that we think about is fantasy, and a lot of things we don't want to be true is reality. And that's unfortunately just the way it is, but advantageously also the way it is, because all of the adversity that we will face to discern truth as best that we are able is things that will help us grow along the way in the process. So that's my 2 cents for why it's worthwhile. And also, it's unfortunately the truth that these tools of thinking have been withheld from most people for a very long time throughout history, so that a very few select people would know how to think critically and thus have an intellectual power advantage over everybody else. So it's not like by not learning it, you're just not leveling up. It's like by learning it, you're leveling up to the same playing field as the other people on this planet that we're playing this game with.
One thing that I want to add that is really important to be aware that powers that should not be, they are using words, their definitions to shape up our reality about certain things. So they change the definitions even in dictionaries for some words. And you have to be really aware and conscious about how you interact with other people using certain words.
Yeah. Well said, guys. Well said. I agree with everything you said there, because you cannot, for me, I mean, you cannot go around in life always imposing your subjectivity on other people. If everybody did that, you'd all be at each other's throats. So you do need to level down, if you like, if you're a highly emotional person, you need to be aware of that. Because highly emotional behavior, you could say, doesn't really make you happy, and it doesn't make other people happy either. Because you're completely you're waving between extremes all the time, right? With your emotions, you're always up and down, and that's got to be pretty tiring. So this Trivium methodology will help you calm down, I reckon, and it will help you discern a lot of things that you will probably realize are the things that are making you upset. An awful lot of it, I will put, is television, social media, the amount of outrage, that's in the headlines every time, just to get you addicted to it, and you keep going back for more. It's not making you happy. So you do need to take time out. But there's a few other things that you mentioned. Justin, you mentioned illusion, and I think that's a great place, because you also, I think, used the word disillusioned. Now, the word disillusioned seems to have a negative connotation to it. They say of somebody, oh, he's disillusioned. Well, what's the opposite? To be illusioned. Now, is it better to be illusioned or disillusioned, meaning you've got a dose of reality? I don't really want to live in a fake world, really. Which this actually leads us to, well, I've looked into it before, but I'll go for it now. I've looked up the etymology of the word grammar, since since grammar is quite important. Online etymology dictionary, I looked at the word grammar. So late 14th century Latin grammar, rules of Latin from Old French grammaire, grammar, learning, especially Latin and philology. Also magic, incantations, spells, mumbo jumbo. 12th century modern French grammaire, okay. An irregular, semi-popular adoption of Latin grammatica, grammar, philology, perhaps via an unrecorded medieval Latin form, grammaria. The classical Latin word is from Greek grammatike, okay, of art of letters, referring both to philology and literature in the broadest sense. So we've also got pertaining to or versed in letters or learning, from grammar, letter, C, gram, If we go a bit further down, so I'll just jump, I'll just continue reading. A much broader word in Latin and Greek, restriction to the meaning to systematic account of rules and usage of language, is a post-classical development until 16th century, limited to Latin in reference to English usage by late 16th century. Thence, rules of a language to which speakers and writers must conform. Okay, that's the understanding we've got. But then there's another meaning here, meaning a treatise on grammar is from 1520s, okay. For the magic sense of grammar, you can look at grammary. The sense evolution is characteristic of dark ages, learning in general, knowledge peculiar to the learned classes, which included astrology and magic, hence the secondary meaning of occult knowledge, late 15th century in English, which evolved in Scottish into glamour. So when we're getting into the type of words such as glamour, a lot of magical senses going on here. So we're back to illusion. Grammar can be used for illusion, right? So we can, I'll click on the word grammary. So we'll have a look at the etymology of that. So 14th century, grammar, also learning, erudition, hence magic, enchantment, variation of grammar, Old French. Okay, we've got all that. But then it says here the dark magic sense, revived by the Scottish. So again, sort of like an illusion. And if you just scroll down, you've even got the word in French, it's grimoire, which is a grimoire, right? It's a book of words, of magical incantations. Magician's Manual for Invoking Demons, 1849. So again, here they mention again, that it's got, you know, it's linked to grammar and glamour. Now, with regards to illusions, now I've also got a great clip here that I will showcase. We can sort of discuss just after.
I just had a really interesting thing come up when you were looking through that with the use of grammar itself as a sort of illusionment. One way you could potentially differentiate propaganda from education. Education would follow the trivium of grammar, then logic, then rhetoric. But propaganda has a different method. They will give you the rhetoric, the logic, the grammar, so that you come to conclusions before you know the definitions of what everything means.
Yeah, so when they provide you with the rhetoric and then the logic, they are providing you with emotions first, and then they're providing you with some dubious form of reasoning that they will reinforce constantly, and then to lead you astray. And you never really do the grammar as such. Like you realize, you understand, well, you have your own sort of understanding of the words that they use, but they're not using them in their true sense. And they're just using your emotions against you to lead you astray, really. But yeah, they're not using it in the right order.
I have something to add here. You mentioned grimoires and magic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also that grimoires are books with spells and to evoke demons and such. Well, I have a definition for magic, which is kind of interesting. Science, ability, and art to influence change to occur in the world that is in accordance with the will. So that is the definition for magic. And basically you use grimoires or grammar to make that influence happen.
Yeah. Well, you could actually say that if you go back to the Dark Ages, where you could say, I mean, I'm just taking a shot in the dark, so to speak, that dark magic or black magic was probably back in those days probably considered by the average Joe. I'm sort of thinking that maybe the elites of back in those days, or the kings or the advisors and all those guys that were you know, in the feudal type of age or medieval, they probably used words that were a bit complicated for people that couldn't read. And so when things started to materialize in the real world to the detriment of the average Joe probably couldn't really understand what was going on, but he just probably thought these guys are, you know, witches or sorcerers. They're using these complicated words or spells, right, that I don't understand. And yet here, you know, these people are gaining everything and I've got nothing. So it's more like the people that didn't know how to read, or I don't know, do we want to use the word unschooled or uneducated, that had this perception of the ruling class using complicated words to their detriment, really.
Isn't that much different today if people do know how to read but still think the same way?
They know how to read, but they do not understand what they are reading.
There you go. And just to quote Richard Grove, to the top of my head, I remember him saying, are you literate if you know how to read but don't choose to read, or choose not to read? Are you illiterate as such? You know, most people, well, again, it's just a stab in the dark here, but I would assume that most people don't read books, or if they do, there may be more, again, back to illusion and, you know, novels type of books that don't necessarily provide them with an understanding of the world that they're living in.
Yeah, and also one thing to consider is that, you know, we have all this information available for people via different channels like TV or internet or books. But the gist of it all is that, are you nescient or are you ignorant? Because if you are nescient, then you don't know. You kind of have this escape from the prison card in your hand. But if you are ignorant, that you basically you know, but you ignore the information, then you are guilty of ignorance and reacting to certain happenings, like what was going on a few years back.
And if you didn't know, now you know. And if now you know for the first time, you may have just moved from nescience to ignorance, and it's now a responsibility to get educated. And that's why we called the show This Is Gonna Hurt.
Exactly.
Very
Spot on.
painful process. Yeah. And there's a mountain to learn, obviously, but this is why we started sort of this show, is to bring awareness to certain topics as well. And we're starting with the basics of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And that will help you throughout your journey and for the rest of your life, really. Yeah. And it's a painful.
AJ.
With pain, you can also learn, right?
That's the great.
Speaking of mountains, maybe we should start this journey on a mountain, maybe a rather specific mountain I think we had in mind.
Oh,
Yeah, the magical mountain, that one.
Yeah.
Where you know, lots of illusions, lots of spells, that type of mountain, I'm guessing, right?
and they
Yeah, that'd be the one.
certain wood to do that.
Candy
Certain
Mountain.
wood.
Big
Yeah.
Rock Candy Mountain.
I'm pretty sure the word Hollywood comes to mind, about mountains and illusions and magic spells. But even the word Hollywood, I mean, that would be an interesting, you know, to look into that. Wasn't Hollywood the type of wood that they used for wands and magic stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
All right, so I will play, just to showcase some of the stuff we've been talking about. The next clip is a clip that was played during the Super Bowl, and this is dated the 1st of February 2009. So it's an advert. Now, just to let you know, we're not paid by, you know, any of these people. It's purely for educational purposes. All right, so here it comes.
Hello, Earth. I'm Alec Baldwin, TV star. You know, they say TV will rot your brain. That's absurd. TV only softens the brain like a ripe banana to take it all the way. We've created Hulu. Hulu beams TV directly to your portable computing devices, giving you more of the cerebral gelatinizing shows you want anytime, anywhere, for free.
I only act out because I want your love. Dynamite.
Mushy mush. And the best part is there's nothing you can do to stop it. I mean, what are you going to do? Turn off your TV and your computer? Once your brains are reduced to a cottage cheese like mush, we'll scoop them out with a melon bowler and gobble them right on up. Oops. I think I'm drooling a little. Because we're aliens. And that's how we roll. Hulu, an evil plot to destroy the world. Enjoy.
Revelation of the craft.
Delicious.
So he's sort of admitting here that TV shows and television and all your devices, they're there to turn your brain into mush, which he then can gobble up with a spoon.
Well, you know, these devices, the way they're physically designed, the light they emit is full spectrum. Our brains think it's sunlight because it's full spectrum light. It's not a reflection of light from the sun. It's its actual light source. And that's even aside from the content in it. Some of the original televisions had screen flicker rates that were patented to put the brain into specific operating frequencies.
There you go.
Yeah. And not just that, but when they were developing social media, they actually did turn to a bit of psychology as well, and because the act of scrolling, the constant scrolling down your walls or your feeds and all that type of thing, is similar to a gambler's when he is pulling the lever there on the fruit machines, right? It's the act of scrolling, and then every couple of seconds, you have your three fruit, your three displays that stop, and then the addiction is to press again, and you constantly get hit with dopamine. So social media has been studied to make you addicted to it, right? Because a lot of money behind it.
Well,
so that's why it also reduces your attention span.
It's not only like social media. I can tell you an example. I've noticed, and people around me have noticed for sure, that let's say that I'm going out and the TV's on, and I start to put my shoes on, and I see the TV. I'm like under the spell. I forget what I'm doing. I'm just looking at the screen, whatever there is, nature program, news, whatever. I'm hypnotized, literally.
Yeah, and I've always wondered. I mean, I should look into it. I probably will at one point. Now that obviously I'm recorded saying it, I must do it. But I've always wondered, why are TVs square? Now, maybe it's to do with the technology itself. The display can only be displayed on a square. Maybe they can't make round displays. Maybe. But to have a frame, right? This square is a frame. It goes back to back in the day, they had the whole artwork. Most of the Renaissance art, everything is in a square, is in a frame. Maybe because the frame is the most. It's a plane, right? The frame provides you with a plane, and you sort of get sucked into that type of shape. That's just my 2 cents on it. I don't know. I've got to look into it.
Funny thing about the shape of the frame, Stanley Kubrick's 2001, The Monolith, that is in 16.9 aspect ratio for some reason.
I did not know that.
Now you know. You're no more nescient about it.
Gotcha.
Now, there are also some other themes in that intro that might well be up for consideration. Now, it starts the show in, a rather nice suit. He's TV personality. Now, he specialized himself in the beginning. I'm Alec Baldwin, but then he disclaimed it with TV personality, bringing him to a generalized, like, he's fitting the character of a TV personality. So it applies to other TV personalities. And then turns to mush, no nonsense, turns to soft, gooey material. Now, that's something that they got excited about, something they were experimenting with to see how it can be. And obviously they profit off of it somehow because they offer it to us for free. All of the content we could possibly want that will distract us and turns our brain to mush, it's not going to cost us anything. It's as little resistance and as much distraction as possible that you can give people. Now, it does, I'd say, beg the question, what value do they get out of dumbing us down to such a degree in offering all of this at their expense, seemingly? It's not free to make TV shows and distribute them all over to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What value do they get? Well, the value that they get, the price that you're paying for it as well, right? I mean, you said it was, they're offering these things for free. Well, let's not forget this was an advert for Hulu. So you are paying for a subscription, really. So you're paying for them to turn your brain into goo or something like that, right? So you're paying for your own dumbing down in a way. You're paying to still be illusioned, or you could say entertainment as well. But what is entertainment? I mean, you could maybe say entertainment is a form of escapism of reality, right? You could say it's even the same thing for a lot of the video games. They're not. What do they bring? Right? It's temporary feel good. You're back to feelings now, right? You're not necessarily learning as such from them. You're not learning how to navigate the world. So in a way, you could even say, I mean, we're back to one of the topics we keep sort of stumbling into is propaganda again, right? As I mentioned in the last show, with this book here that I mentioned from Jacques Ellul, Propaganda, right? The Formations of Men's Attitudes, written in 1962, he talks about one of the forms of propaganda, which he calls pre-propaganda. And he specifically talks about movies and television and the education system or the public schooling, right? As a form to socialize you, to mold you, and to get you, into this normal human being that they can manipulate. That's what they get out of it.
Yeah, and once again, it's about time. We all do have the same amount of time, no matter if you're Rockefeller or whoever. You have 24 hours a day. So basically, they are giving us this free so they can lure us into their cave. And then they got us. They can force feed us whatever they want to. And one thing also to consider is that you are spending your time with them. You are not investing your time to learn something. Of course, you can do that also, but most of the people are spending their time watching TV series or movies. It's spending your time, spending your only true currency that you have.
I have a website here that we can sort of showcase as well, which we discussed about offline or just before the show. Did you guys want to move into that now with the list of logical fallacies?
Yes.
Actually talking about fallacies, yeah.
Okay, so I will display that. So this website, I believe it is Jan Irwin's website. So he's done tremendous work on the Trivium, the Quadrivium, and he's got so much material as well in there. So here I'll just show you. So it's called triviumeducation.com. And I've gone in the Trivium section. Now you can have a look at the grammar section. That's quite clear as well of what all that is. I mean, we've covered in the first episode. There's the logic aspect of it and the rhetoric, but here I've just clicked on some fallacies, and we've got then a whole list of some of the most common fallacies. And so as you can see, well, here he's listed 42 of them, or some of the most common ones, but there are obviously an awful lot more. Now, the first one here, ad hominem, is one of the most common one used, which is basically a personal attack, right? So it's basically character assassination. So, well, let's see, I'll click on it and he should give an example. So here he sort of says that, as an example, he says person A makes claim X. Person B makes an attack on person A. Therefore, A's claim is false. So he gives an example. Bill says, I believe that abortion is morally wrong. Dave says, of course you would say that. You're a priest. And then Bill says, what about the arguments I gave to support my position? Indeed, it's not because you're a priest that abortion is necessarily wrong. So, I know that obviously abortion is a tremendous topic. But anyway, so then Dave says, those don't count. Like I said, you're a priest, so you have to say that abortion is wrong. Further, you're just a lackey to the Pope, so I can't believe what you say. So again, the topic here is abortion. Is it morally wrong, yes or no? The fact that the guy's a priest or a Buddhist or, it doesn't matter what he is, what envelope he has. The topic is abortion. So ad hominem is a way to divert the attention off the topic and onto the person. But then it means you never get to the bottom. When you walk away from that conversation, do you know if abortion is morally wrong or not? Or, so that's the point of these logical fallacies, is to go through them, sift through them so that you actually get to the bottom of the topic you're wanting to discuss.
This is a theme we're going to run into throughout looking at these fallacies, is what the ad hominem is a diversion away from the actual evidence and argument that was presented by the original person. Because effectively, person A makes that claim X, and they say whatever it is they're going to say, and then person B may or may not have the skills and evidence to go against the claim, so they just go ahead and slander the person. And it's an attempt to emotionally sway the other people watching the argument towards thinking about this person must be wrong because of these things that he does, and therefore we can toss out the rest of the evidence. It's really just a distraction away from the evidence and the argument itself.
Yeah, and another very common one is the appeal to emotion, which, just to illustrate that, I mean, we actually already did in a way. Alec Baldwin in that clip, he is appealing to people's humor, right? So he's humoring people, and that in a way is satisfying a bit of your emotion. Oh, it's all very funny because, it's all CGI, right? He's in the mountain of Hollywood, and he's in this underground bunker in Hollywood. So obviously it is all illusion. It's just a bit of fun. So that's the appeal to emotion as well that is in some of these videos. And you can actually go through any advert, really. There'll be loads of logical fallacy in there, and you can actually make a little bit of a game. If you've got any children, you can actually, talk to them about these things, and you can then make it a game, make it quite entertaining to actually look at some of these adverts that use your emotions to get you to buy a product or to toe the line or whatever it is.
Definitely bonus points if you do teach your children.
So did we want to move into the next clip? It's the one with Marc van Ranst, who's the medical officer for Belgium. And then we can have a look at some of the tools that he uses that are not logical at all. And he actually openly discusses these.
Send it.
Yep. Okay. This was the 21st of January, 2019, that he gave a speech to Chatham House, which is, if you haven't looked into it, it's also called the Royal Institute of International Affairs.
Thank you very much, Ab. Thanks for the invitation. And I was asked to tell you about my experiences being the crisis manager, the flu commissioner for Belgium, and highlighting the communication aspects there. These are some of my conflicts of interest over the past 20 years, I guess.
So we'll go through this and we'll pause it as we go through. So he starts off by saying that these are some of his conflicts of interests. So what have we got here? Lectures and/or advisory boards for GSK, which is Big Pharma manufacturing, Sanofi Pasteur, another manufacturing, Merck, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott, and Biocartis. Okay, so by law, they have to disclose any potential conflict of interest. Now, they don't necessarily investigate every time if you are actually committing or what your motives are. They don't seem to investigate that. So it'll be interesting actually even to do a bit of digging maybe at some other stage to see about the conflict of interest. How does the process actually work? So, okay, you are disclosing that you've got or potential. They don't say I'm deliberately trying to sway you into something because I'm selling these guys products. But they are saying these are potential conflict of interest that I may have because I do get a wage from these companies, or I do get some sort of commission. So it'd be interesting to see further down the line what is the process when they do promote something on behalf of these companies without actually telling you. So do they ever get into trouble, for example? So I'll continue. Just let me know whenever you want to pause it, all right, if you see anything.
It all started for me at that time, well, actually in 2006 when I was appointed. This is an unpaid hobby, so it's not a profession or a function, whatever. It's really a hobby, that flu commissioner thing.
Paused it. Okay, so it's going to be long, guys. So I've just paused it there because he's just saying that this flu commissioner thing, this thing that I've got going with the Belgian government, is just a hobby. So you sort of go, okay. And he was still the commissioner or the medical officer for Belgium. So he said he got hired by the Belgian government in 2006, and he still was in that same position all throughout the COVID pandemic. And he's saying he's doing it as a hobby. So again, it'd be interesting doing the grammar, if you want, of this guy. Have a look at his background. If you're out there and you're into this stuff, have a look who he is. Where was he educated? What is he putting forward? Did he ever get a pay from the Belgian government, or has it been a hobby all the way up to today? Remember that this clip is from 2019, right? So it was literally 21st of January 2019. So 1 year, pretty much, well, not day for day, but 1 year before they declared a national, a world pandemic, right? So he's saying he doesn't get paid. It's just a hobby from the Belgian government. So in other words, who is paying him? Is all of his salary paid by the people he mentioned in the conflict of interest? Maybe, who knows?
I just like to ask how many of our audience have ever had a full-time hobby for 17 years that wasn't a main profession?
Valid question. I think it is.
On April 24, 2009, that was when WHO said, okay, there will be a pandemic, and that's when the thing started. And then you have one opportunity to do it right. I mean, day one is so important. In day one, you start your communication with the press, with the people, and you have to do it right. I mean, you have to go for one voice, one message. In Belgium, they chose to appoint a non-politician to do that. I mean, I have no party affiliations, and that makes things a little bit, at that time at least, a little bit easier, because you're not attacked politically, majority, minority. That doesn't come into play, and that was a huge advantage. The second advantage is that you can play in Brussels the complete naive guy and get a lot more done than you would otherwise be able to do. So one voice, one message, that's the tone that you set on day one, and you have to be very transparent in that. My name is the Interministerial Commissary for Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Planning. That, of course, is too long. That became the Flu Commissary, and that was a lot easier. You have to be omnipresent that first day or the first days, so that you attract the media attention. You make an agreement with them that you will tell them all, and if they call, you will pick up the phone. When you do that, then you can profit from these early days to get complete carpet coverage of the field, and they're not going to search for alternative voices there. And if you do that, that makes things a lot easier.
All right, I'm just pausing it there. Wow. I've only just played it for, what is it, like a full minute? I've let it roll a bit. So much to pick out there. But, he sort of said that from day one, you've got to provide one message. So he's centralization of the message. Now, this guy is supposed to be the medical guy, right? He's the flu commissary, as he said. So it doesn't sound much like public health to me, but maybe he will discuss more public health after that. But he's obviously saying that you need one message. It needs to come from one source, or if it's not one source, well, it has to come from multiple people, but it has to be the same message. So that, and then he goes on to say that if you've got, good relationship with the media, it's interesting. You have to sort of reach out to them and be available all the time when they reach out to you, because that way sort of suggests that, nobody sort of questions it too much if you're always available, type of thing.
You're spot on. It's not public health. He is talking about public relations, and he is giving tools from a logical standpoint. He is giving tools to the people who are presumably going to be overseeing the public relation aspect, because he's speaking on public relations. And he's giving tools of how to conduct yourself on day one so that you alone can present the evidence. You want to be available for the media. You want to be their correspondent. You want to be the person in the official outfit so that they don't go looking at what alternative sources, narrow down what evidence is available, what grammar is available. And now it's much easier to funnel the conclusion you want to make.
Come on, man. It's just a hobby.
Just a hobby.
Just a hobby. All right, let's see what else he does with his spare time.
And then you convey the message, and you can do that if you do it that way, that our country is ready for a pandemic. That is a gross overestimation for sure, but it is crucial to go into that pandemic. First of all, what's in the name? If you talk about the pandemic, it's quite important. People were talking about the swine flu, the pandemic H1N1. 09 virus, novel influenza, 2009 AH1N1 flu. At some point it was called the North American influenza, the novel flu virus. That was way too difficult, so we called it the Mexican flu. Yeah? That got me into huge trouble with the ambassador of Mexico at that time, and oh, she was furious. Afterwards, we became good friends. I still get invited to their New Year's reception every year. But people were making fun of it, and okay, that's probably unavoidable. But the fact to have a clear and recognizable name, which was easy for the lay public to understand and use, was actually quite important. It also worked. This is the word of the year of 2009. Defriending on Facebook became #1. To my big disappointment, Mexican flu was second, and flu commissary was #6. So the term works, and that makes things a lot easier. These first weeks, that's easy street. When you have no opposition and everybody needs news and they can come to you for news, you can bring quite a lot of neutral information, and it is picked up, and it is well, the news is brought the way you bring it, and that is you can only do that in the first couple of weeks or months. One of the problems that we have, or that we had, is that we did not have a media budget. That was really €0 that we could spend. That means that you have to use every opportunity you can get to, well, it's not Britannia rules the waves, but rule the airwaves to bring out your message. And that's something that you can do for free on radio, on TV. If you have good pre-existing relationships with the media, you can try something else. We tried the following thing. We asked all of the anchors of the different TV stations, are you willing for free to participate in a sort of infomercial that you would pay for, all of you? And they said, yes, we'll do that. And that was hugely influential. And well, we would never be able, nobody would ever be able to pay for something like this. But if you have pretty good pre-existing relationships with them, then you can ask for a return favor.
Just to translate what's on the screen there. So this is when it's saying infomercial, that it says on there in Flemish, which is a northern part of Belgium, it says, he who feels sick in the morning should stay home. It's better to stay home there. And he says as well, if you can use your existing relationships, if you've got a good relationship with the media, you can use your relationships and to exert that type of influence. So again, he's not necessarily talking about the truth about health, about how to get rid of the flu and to stay healthy and to exercise or have fruit and all this type of thing. He's just talking obviously for the communication part of it, and how as a medical officer for the government, which is just a hobby, remember, how he is using people. He is manipulating the message. He is trying to get to as many people as possible as the members of the public. So not at any point so far, I mean, again, maybe you might talk about it later, but there hasn't been at any point where the messaging to the public has been about good health. It just seems to be how I can use people, how I can use my influence and to keep, try and keep everybody happy. But again, are we back in an illusion? Or is this actually reality? Is he talking about the concerns, the actual concerns of the flu?
If I can add something, all that he says corresponds with the word magic. Science, ability, and the art to influence change to occur in the world that is in accordance with the will. Isn't that magic?
Word magic.
If he was commissioned for health in the first place, or if he was commissioned for public relations in regard to health.
I
Are
wonder.
we talking about conspiracy theories now, or propaganda, or something? That shouldn't. That's not. Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Not a claim, just a curiosity.
It's a hobby. You can't be doing that.
Or they might do that. One of the things that we tried, but it's 10 years ago, was using Facebook and Twitter, but, well, there were not enough people on Facebook and Twitter at that time to really have an impact. If we would do that now, that would be a prime channel to communicate. However, that works both ways. I mean, also the fake news would be transmitted much more readily through Facebook, through Twitter, than it did 10 years ago. Answering the question of the day. No.
What did he say there? That was 10 years ago. So this is 2019. He says that was 10 years ago. So in 2009, they wanted to use social media to spread whatever they wanted to spread, but they're saying that, oh, well, there wasn't enough people. We can't reach out to enough people with our message. Well, if you've been following the news lately, or not necessarily the news, because I don't know if it was on every single channel, but hopefully you've done a bit of digging, and we've seen an awful lot of concern with regards to social media censorship during this, well, the pandemic we just had since 2020. There's an awful lot of things with regards to censorship, and that seems to still be going on. So because the justification for it is fake news. Now, it's kind of interesting to me that he was talking about, in 2019, talking about fake news, but did fake news, was it actually a thing, or that the public, the public had any awareness to it in 2009? I mean, after all, he did say that there wasn't enough people on social media. So was there fake news in 2009, or is he using a current topic and projecting it into the past? I'm not necessarily saying it's pre-propaganda, but could be. You could see it that way, but that might just be circumstantial, right? Maybe he is suggesting in 2019, maybe he is suggesting to the people in that room with him at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, maybe he's suggesting to those people that are involved in public relations to maybe reach out to social media to censor so-called fake news. Now, he hasn't provided any argument with what he meant by fake news. What is an example of fake news? He hasn't defined it. He's just used the term fake news, but what springs to mind when he uses the word fake news? In 2019, let me see if I'm just trying to, joggle back in my memory. 2019, Donald Trump was president of the United States. 2019 in the UK, it wasn't Boris Johnson yet. I think it might have been Theresa May at that point. I think Boris Johnson only got in, was it September 2019, somewhere around there, or it might have been him, but anyway. So that terminology, fake news, again, is what springs to mind is, lies or I'm not sure. Alternative facts, I think, was one of the terminologies used at one point by the media to talk about what Donald Trump was saying, that he used alternative facts.
It's one of those catch-all phrases. It's almost semantically, it's really interesting that we're talking about this because we don't have a definition about it necessarily, unless we were to go to give a definition, but it wouldn't necessarily fit with what his definition is in this presentation. An important question to be asked is, in regards to who is he talking to, what might the context of fake news be? Because if they're talking about public relations and how to make a narrative for the public, fake news in that situation could well be, not a claim, but could well be alternative media sources that have evidence and valid claims could be fake news to them in that room, who definitely just want a very specific narrative to come out.
He was complaining that in 2009 that there was not enough people in social media, but in 2019 there were maybe too many people in social media, and it was too open, so they had to start censor it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a valid suggestion or a valid thing to consider. So he's sort of showing that there's a flip side. So he's sort of saying that, yeah, in 2009, there wasn't enough people on social media, so we didn't really use social media to communicate our message. But he's sort of saying that today, yeah, there might be, there might be enough people on social media, but we've got to be careful of fake news as well. So there is some sort of implied suggestion there, or, that we've got to do something about fake news, which, again, as Justin rightfully pointed out, that he hasn't defined fake news. Now, in that context, you might argue that, or he might be arguing that fake news means anything that is contrary to our one message, which he mentioned at the beginning. He talks about it's important to have one message. So fake news seems to be anything that goes against that one message, whether it's right or wrong. It's not considered. It doesn't matter. It's what this group or he considers to go against his message. Now, again, it's in an open debate. You'd have to debate what he's putting forward. What is fake news? I mean, even the terminology fake news. What is there such a thing as fake news and real news? I mean, isn't news just news?
No matter what the journalist's question is quite important. So we had a call center which was gradually becoming more and more populated, and every almost hour to hour and later day to day, you have to get an idea what are the questions that the people are asking. And every day, these questions were delivered multiple times so that I could work them into the interviews no matter what the question was. The first questions, that was the first peak, and that peak was about 900 calls per day at the moment, per week at the first peak. The first questions were travel related. Can I still go to Mexico? I have planned a vacation, can I get my money back? If you solve that problem by declaring an emergency, you help quite a lot of people, and that first peak goes away. And then you have to predict the future. That's hard because the future has not happened yet. Predicting the past is a lot easier, but you have to predict the future in order to prepare the public and not have an over exaggeration or an exaggeration of the information in the press. So I said, okay, Belgium, small country, we will also have H1N1 cases. Yeah? When you bring that, it is front page news. When then, a couple of days later, the first H1N1 case arrives in the country, it is the second time that they have to bring that news, so they bring it in a more muted and I think appropriate way, but you can only do that when you prepare the scene for that. That was the second wave of questions. People were asking more questions about what do I do when I get sick and so on, and that gives you the opportunity to work with that. And then you have to say, okay, well, we will have H1N1 deaths. Of course, that would be unavoidable. I used there Sir Donaldson's quote where he said that in the UK, by the peak of the epidemic, 40 people would die per day at the end of the summer. So 62 at that time million people in the UK, 40 deaths a day. I worked it out for Belgium. That would be 7 deaths a day at the peak of the epidemic. I used that in the media. 7 Belgian flu deaths per day at the peak of the epidemic would be realistic. That is true in every year, even interpandemically. That is very, very conservative. However, talking about fatalities is important because when you say that, people say, wow, what do you mean? People die because of influenza?
Do you guys want to take it away?
You know, it's pretty clear now that we're not talking about how to treat medical disease. It's very clear now that we're talking about how to take a narrative, even in his own words, like this many people are already dying from disease every single year. It happens. This is the statistic. But when we attach a marketing campaign to it of, look, because of this disease, these people are dying. It's also at the same time being fallacious because it is omitting the evidence that they already knew that this many deaths are already happening per year. And he also subtly brought up a case for tightening governmental power when he said these call centers, their very first questions were, what about my travels? And if I need to get my money back because there's this Mexican flu going on down in Mexico that is just named that, but people get the ideas, right? And it's these emotional connections that draw them to action. He subtly goes ahead and says, now, if it were deemed an emergency, then we would suddenly have, more of an ability. People get their refunds, the travel doesn't go on, or the travel can, but it's up to them. He's proposing something that's very detrimental to people because it will always result in a restriction of their freedoms. But he goes on to say and frame it in such a way that this will make things quite easier. People will be a lot happier with our response if we just give them what they want. Yes, you can have your money back. The government will take care of it. Experts are on it. Don't worry about it. We got it.
Yeah, it's all about control. I mean, they are controlling narrative, and they are controlling your response to it. And by giving in a way people what they want, like money back if you can't travel, that is just a side narrative or a side candy for common people. The main gist is always that we are going to impose these things on people.
Yeah. And what is quite revealing, right? When you listen to this guy, he's actually revealing some of his methods that he's done to people. He has already done these things, right? This is a chat in 2019 on what he did in 2009, right? And he said at the beginning of this speech that the World Health Organization declared the flu to be a pandemic in 2009. And then he goes on to say something that is completely the science trademark, right? I'm being a bit facetious here, but he again, he's supposed to be the flu commissioner and to be presenting, you could say, facts, scientifically based facts. And he goes on just now to say that he just looked at what was going on in Great Britain or the UK. And he says, okay, they had X amount of flu cases, over 62 million inhabitants. And he just sort of did a ratio towards the Belgian population, which is what, 10 million at the time. So therefore it equals 7 Belgians that, can die from the flu per year, per day. And he says, and that's realistic. So he hasn't done any homework of what's going on in Belgium itself. Has he actually even bothered to check what was going on in the UK? Or obviously not. He's not saying he did. He just said he looked at the headlines by Sir William or Donaldson, and he just extrapolated to the Belgians. And then he then explains right there at the end. He then talks about people's reactions to it, saying, "Oh my God, what, people die from the flu?" So that is directly, you could say, one of the aims of propaganda is with the headlines to get you emotional, to get you amazed, right? We're back to that word, because you are more suggestible when you are highly emotional. So now, once you are amazed, you didn't realize that people died of the flu, 7 a day. Wow, that seems to be a lot. I didn't know that. So you will now be more controllable. So whatever happens next is them now leading you. You're in a highly emotional state that can now lead you, because you have no control over that situation. So you will now turn to government for solutions.
And it's an assumption as well that the same case of the flu in one area will be the same case of the flu in the other area, despite the fact that ecological environments change, immune systems are adapted to their environment, and it would have to transfer. And it's also it's making assumptions in areas that you can't make assumptions in if you're a commissioner of health. I mean, that's kind of your job to get it right. You'd presume, I'd think. That's right. It's just a hobby. Never mind.
Yeah, and also he's imposing the oldest trick in the book, which is false fear, feed the fear, that it can be you who is included in that 7 deaths per day. Fear is the mind killer.
And that was a necessary step to take. And then, of course, a couple of days later, you had the first H1N1 death in the country, and the scene was set and it was already talked about. That was the third peak of questions that were, well, the first that it had an impact and you have to deal with that. I went to the first couple of funerals. You have to be very quiet, sit in the back, but it shows that you care, and I think that was at that time quite important. So, all in all, at that time, the overall feeling in the population, in the press was, the Belgian approach is reasonable. In fact, we wanted to be calm, cool, and collected. And our mantra was, and that was from day one, at this moment, it is comparable, more or less, to seasonal influenza in terms of outcome, but we have to prepare for severe scenarios. Like in 1918, the first wave was rather mild, and you could not predict that a second wave would carry a high mortality. We focus on low-cost basic hygiene measures. We did not do any school closures. We used antivirals for high-risk groups. Actually, we used antivirals in the beginning for people who were ill. I had pre-positioned cars in the different provinces, and they would drive antivirals to patients when they would be diagnosed by influenza in order to delay the onset of the epidemic, and that worked until the end of the school year. We only purchased 1 dose of vaccine per person, and the vaccination plan would be to vaccinate more or less the same high-risk groups as for seasonal influenza. And then the vacation came. And that is, communication-wise, a very dangerous period. It's a dangerous period because the more untrained journalists are at the helm, yeah? And you get the weirdest questions. They're understaffed, so more articles from other countries will come in and contaminate your message. And that was a weird period. That was pictures that my father took from the holiday with the grandchildren. And I was not the most social guy, I must admit. And my son was born 2 weeks before the pandemic struck, so that was not good timing.
One thing that I want to add, that funny thing that he said, that when the first person died, the scene was set. What scene? Is it the theater? Is it the play? What is it? And also later he said that later came this more untrained journalists, which would contaminate the message. So it's really, he's revealing how this theater is played.
Is he afraid that the evidence that he brings forward won't hold to the light of day of somebody using logic? Why would you be afraid to opposing views if what you're sharing is the actual and factual?
They have scripted already. So when people outside the theater come in and start to ask questions, as he said, that's a really dangerous time for the narrative.
Exactly, for the narrative. Because don't forget, he's supposed to be in this deadly flu pandemic declared by the World Health Organization to be deadly. And then he's talking about holidays and vacation being a dangerous time. What? Because you're going to die? You're going to catch the flu from somebody? You're going to be transmitting it? No. It's dangerous because somebody's going to not contaminate somebody else, is going to contaminate the message. So the guy's now on holiday, right, during a deadly flu season. Does it make sense? It doesn't really to me. I'm not buying it.
He just had a child a couple weeks ago, and it's only his hobby. Of course he'd be on holiday.
Hey, come on, man. He's on holiday from his hobby.
He's worked hard.
Everyone needs a break.
Hobby. Yeah.
Especially when you're needed most.
Yeah.
And then comes the time, inevitably, that they're going to talk about you. The flu commissioner is really a great guy. And then you get the feel-good articles about, yeah, what does he like, what music does he like, pictures from my first laboratory when I was 13 years old. And it's all feel-good, but when they do that, they also sharpen the axes at the same time. And then your personal life becomes a little bit compromised, and so then they come to your home, and you have to really limit that, because if you do not limit that, then you have no life. And then everything is said about the pandemic, about you, and then they search for controversy. At a certain point in time, I had a controversy about the payment of the physicians for the mass vaccination that would happen in a couple of months or a couple of weeks later. And the quote that I gave them in terms of how much money they would receive, that was far too low, and I had to be fired. You can solve that quite easily. I said, okay, you want me to be fired. I would like to win the lottery. The odds of both of these things are happening are fairly slim, and that passed. And then you come to the phase where they're going to be much more critical. And the first one was, the government does not do enough. The H1N1 vaccine will arrive too late, and there will not be enough vaccine. Get it while you can. That was the first really atmosphere that was created. So not enough vaccine, get it while you can. So at that point I had to say, okay, I will be the last one to be vaccinated. I mean, you can all go in before me. I'll be the last one, and that later on I regretted that message. That vaccination campaign got a huge number of questions. That was actually the crux of the campaign, was the vaccination campaign, and many people had questions there. So you had to show them that you had. I mean, if the stockpiles, you had to walk there and walk in the rooms where you could show them that we have the vaccines, and they are already in the country. A lot of reassurance was necessary there. And then you had to pick who is going to be vaccinated first. And then, well, women and children first, whatever. I mean, risk groups, they were important. And then I misused the fact that the top football, soccer clubs in Belgium, inappropriately and against all agreements, vaccinated they made their soccer players priority people. So I said, I can use that. Because if the population really believes that this vaccine is so desirable that even the soccer players would be dishonest to get their vaccine, I said, okay, I can play with that. So I made a big fuss about this. This is Van Ranst is raving mad, but it worked. And actually, these vaccination campaigns by the GPs went really, really well. In a number of weeks, everybody could be vaccinated. That's still a fairly relevant portion of the pandemic. Well,
so just with regards into that clip or that section of it, again, a lot to unpack there. But again, he does say, oh, if people, believe that they want this vaccine, so it seems to be, don't forget as well, at the beginning of this video clip, he did say you have conflict of interests, right? Or potential conflict of interests. So here he is now trying to get people to want a vaccine. Now, maybe it's for legitimate reasons, but again, as we've seen, is that there doesn't seem to be much science in his message. It just seems to be constantly within the public relations framework, constantly bouncing off what the people are saying, what the headlines are saying, or
Yeah, one thing that comes to my mind is we mentioned earlier the word illusion. Now, what do you guys think? Is this all illusion that he's presenting, or does it have anything to do with reality or truth?
I would think that his hobby would be a bit easier if he were working in reality and truth, because then he wouldn't need to add in all of the extra effort of concerting a narrative. The soccer players go ahead and get their flu vaccine, And now, oh, look, we can use this to our advantage for our narrative. So we'll make a campaign based on that. If it were all built in goodwill, honesty, and truth, you know, maybe he should have been jumping up to say, hey, I am the first person that will get this thing to show you guys that it's safe and it's the right thing to do, rather than be, you guys all go ahead and I'll get it last to make sure that we have enough for everybody.
Well, I won't give away, you know, the rest of the clip, but we might find that he actually does an analysis on, how can I say, an analysis on whether or not it was based in reality or if it was an illusion, to answer Jarmo's question. Is this more of an illusion or reality? Well, we shall see. He will reveal some of that, actually, I think in the next segment.
It worked fine in Flanders. So you know Belgium, it's a complicated country. And this is the vaccination coverage. And you could see Flanders did really well. I did as many interviews in French than in Dutch. However, in the Flemish part of the country, we listened to the Flemish media. In the French-speaking part of the country, they equally often listen to or watch the French television, where all kind of other messages were coming across, and that was really polluting the vaccination campaign in.
All right, so just that section there. So he just says that because Belgium is a complicated question, indeed, problem, because indeed the north part of Belgium is they speak Flemish, which is, you could say it's Dutch, you know, it's that type of language. But don't tell them I said that because they'll get annoyed. And in the south part of Belgium, they speak French. So as he said, in the south part of Belgium, a lot of the TV channels, they also get them from France. So it just shows me that based off his analysis on his chart there, I'll just show that as I'm talking. But on his chart, you can clearly see the distinction of the language barrier, or what he called the pollution. And he says, so what he seems to be saying that because of the cross messaging, the southern part of Belgium were maybe getting a bit confused because the French had another message maybe compared to what he put out. So then the southern part of Belgium were like, well, I'm not going to get my flu shot. Is that what he's saying? I mean, I don't know. That's what he's suggesting. But so again, back to what Jarmo asked, the question that you asked, is this more illusion or reality? Well, it just seems that the south part of Belgium are receiving mixed messages, and they're going, well, it just seems that there's something wrong here, there's something odd. And so they didn't get their flu shots. Now that could be one explanation of it, because they got mixed messaging. Now you might say that, oh, but both messages were based off science. But then why are they so different? I mean, surely the scientific evidence, whether it's from Belgium or France, should lead people to the same conclusion that it's a deadly flu epidemic or pandemic, as he said in the beginning, therefore I must go and get my shot. But yet that wasn't the case. So there's been some distrust from the French part towards his communication. Now you could maybe say, oh, you know, the South part speaking French, oh, well, they just, I don't know, anti-Flemish because he's got a Flemish accent, right? So he's obviously from the Flanders section. So the other argument could be that, well, maybe the South part have got some heavy biases against the North, which, yeah, there are some language tensions. There are, you know, that you can talk about that. But is that the case? Now, again, he hasn't put any evidence forward to that might be the case. He's just said, oh, there's been contamination of the message. Well, that might not be true. I mean, it could be true, but there may be other factors. So this is back to what we're discussing, the logic aspect of it. There could be multiple arguments to put forward here. Yet he maybe jumps to conclusion that, oh, there's contamination of the message. But again, then my question is, if there's contamination of the message, well, again, if the message is scientific, why are the conclusions different?
Well, one thing that I want to point out and underline is that he used the word polluted. It's really important because, you know, in order to do such a thing like mass vaccination, there has to be like conformity. And now when the mixed messages started to come from the French side, the message got polluted, and it's clearly shown on the map.
And then, of course, people say, okay, the vaccine is unsafe, and then you get the swine flu hoax, and the vaccine could kill you, say no to the vaccine, that atmosphere starts. And then after the crisis, everybody becomes smart. Yeah? And you have to accept that from the get-go. And then the overall statement was, no, well, the government did too much, of course, because the number of deaths were disappointing to some people. And then all the books are written, and everybody uses all the data and forgets that you had to take the decisions based on a fragment of the data that were available, or that would be available later on. And then it was turned into a scam. People were really making money out of it. And I think the Council of Europe played a very bad role in this. This is Wolfgang Wodark, and I want to shame him, actually, because he, in the Council of Europe, had a motion for a recommendation, fake pandemics, a threat for health. They basically said that all these virologists, vaccinologists, they all have money in their pockets. They're dishonest people. That's easy to say. This is when you Google for H1N1. Of course, there was a peak in October and November. You didn't hear Wodark at that time. When you Google Wodark, you see that it starts nicely after the end of the pandemic. People become very brave at the end of the pandemic. I think that's not good.
So just in closing out there for that clip, are we seeing an ad hominem for that last Waldorf that he talks about? Or
Well,
is he actually pushing back against the arguments that were put forward?
Yeah, and he was boasting about it. And also,
he wants to shame him.
Yeah, exactly. He openly said that. And also the fact that he said that afterwards everybody become smart. Well, the thing is, if they would have been truthful right from the beginning, maybe people would have been smart right from the get-go. Not only afterwards, but when the facts come out or contradictions.
And he simultaneously says it's a bad thing that people get smart and then they get bold about communicating about what they've learned.
Yeah. So, although that whole topic of his was about communication and communicating to the public about health issues, he's never said at one point that he can back up with facts or with studies any of the attacks or the criticism that he gets from the, you could say, the alternative media. He didn't say anything. What type of people were criticizing the, what was labeled there as the hoax flu pandemics or something. But he doesn't really. To me, when I watched that, or that section, it didn't really comfort me that there was any science behind the message he was communicating. I mean, at no point has he actually meant, or he probably hasn't even used the word study, not once. Mm-hmm. I mean, I might be wrong, but if he did use it once, it might have been earlier on in the beginning or something, but he hasn't reinforced the message in 2019 that he did a good job in 2009 by using factual studies or anything at all. It always, again, as I said, the topic is about communication, but you'd still want to talk about science and what the message was.
Hey, it's just a hobby.
So he's using a presentation there, just a PowerPoint. And correct me if I'm wrong, but he didn't have any footnotes or sources or further points of information to go into what he was sharing. And nor did he make it specific. He wasn't talking about one aspect of this thing objectively. What he was talking about as communication in a broad sense would be generalized without well-defined terms, So, I mean, even after watching that for the 15 minutes or so that we had, you know, from a logical perspective, what is it that he's even talking about if it doesn't have evidence?
And one thing that really annoyed me was when the people laughed. I mean, he got up on the stage, he presented his case in a way that kind of that we did this trick, and look at all the people that took it seriously. And it was all like fun and games to them. How to do the trick, the magic on people. You can't be truthful when your paycheck depends on it.
He's not getting
And-
paid. It's a hobby.
Oh,
So-
yes. Sorry.
So let's discover this topic a little bit in the book of etymology. First, let's define professional. In this, it has a profession is the etymological root comes from taking vows in a religious order, a vow of belief in or obedience to religion, occupation professed. Is he professing the occupation of being a health commissioner? Now, of professional, and it combines it with professor, a public teacher of the highest rank in a faculty of learning. Now, he would have the highest rank in his territory, and being that he's talking about communication at large, in fact, in a way, it's implied that his faculty of learning would be mass media, one who makes a profession. Okay, so that kind of fits into what he's doing by that route, but let's also go back to hobby. What is it when there is a hobby? This is really interesting. It gives
Can I give it a go first?
sure.
Has it got anything to do with illusions and hobbits, Lord of the
So-
Rings, or is that a hobby? Is another hobbit?
So get this. Small horse in the Morris dance. Meaning a figure of a horse manipulated by a performer, a stick with a horse's head used as a toy, a favorite pastime.
Well, it seems to me that your description of a horse and I don't know, some sort of stick, it is some form of hobbit, right? They're hopping around in a way, but yeah, you're right. It does seem he is more by providing more an illusion. That's what it seems like to me.
And even lying about the fact that he's doing it professionally.
Yeah, well, again, back to the original question I had right from the get-go of this clip, the introduction, when he talked about his conflict of interests, and then said that it was just a hobby thing that he's getting from the government. Now, he might have just been joking, and maybe he does get payment from the government for that job, but he didn't really say that. But anyway, so let's go with the premise that he was truthful and wasn't trying to humor people. But if he wasn't getting paid by the government, then who is he being paid by? And then the answer would then be, well, the conflict of interest, those companies that you saw at the beginning, right? J&J, Merck, Sanofi, etc.
And we know he's getting paid because you can't do a hobby for more than a decade and not do something else to earn your living.
Yeah, unless he's got very deep pockets somewhere. But again, if you do your homework and you look into who he is, probably he's not from a very wealthy, when I say very wealthy, he's not from a very from a wealthy background that would permit him to just do hobbies for the next, I don't know, which is what, for at least 10 years, 10, 15 years.
Something like this, a public profession, a government counsel, somebody that more than likely doesn't have overwhelmingly deep reserves of finances to do this as a hobby. It's either he's doing his job by the government or he's using his conflicts of interest to propagate the whole system that he's writing on. That was a great clip, by the way, to bring in to sort of go through these different ways of being fallacious and real world examples.
Yeah, and you can see how even within his presentation of communications, you could call it propaganda, right? He's propagating information, and even within his presentation of it, he's openly talking about the logical fallacies in a way of what he's putting out there. He's saying that, oh, people didn't believe me, so we said this and we said that. So it's all based off emotions in a way. He hasn't. So again, we're back to logic. It doesn't stand in logic, but the only the only section where it does actually hold ground is if he's trying to lead people to a certain point, and then therefore everything that he's done in between that will lead you to that point makes sense and is logical with that in that sense. So it's logical within the manipulation because he wants to lead you somewhere. So he's revealing the method.
Now, what is the solution?
Practice the trivium, I reckon. And we've said it before, take back responsibility, take back ownership of your thinking, be responsible for yourself. Don't outsource your brain. Don't outsource, anything that you can do yourself. Or even if you don't know how to do it, go out and learn it. Become self-sufficient. Don't always rely on other people to do stuff for you. Not because they won't necessarily do it for you, but because when you do it, you will learn. And that goes back to what we were saying in the first episode. We'd rather have freedom than slavery. If you outsource everything, including your mind, well, you will become a slave. That's my take on it. So in other words, just to sum it up, to be responsible of yourself, of everything around you.
Solid. And be discerning, because falling prey to illusionment can be very dangerous. And if you've been nescient, if you have not been exposed to these things before, that's understandable, that's explainable. But if you're ignorant, if you're choosing not to think, it could be detrimental, and you should know that. It's not a threat, it's observations of the ways that the world works. It's much easier to adapt to the world when you stay in the realm of this is what I can verify based on evidence.
Yeah, to me, it comes to mind that be mindful and be aware of the grammar, and also ask the question, cui bono, who benefits? And another thing is that always follow money. That can lead you to interesting places.
Now, we started this episode on a hill in Hollywood, but I think we should finish this episode on top of a radio broadcasting tower in Hollywood. And perhaps we can find some sensibilities to solutions in the form of film artistic expression.
Frank! You and Holly clear?
I'm clear. Are you? Don't do it. Don't interfere. You can't win. side with me.
You have 10 seconds. 9, 8,